in there and cook the fucking chicken in. Get in there and cook the fucking chicken in, you fat cunt. Go on the fuck up and cook it! You lazy bastard. But you haven't, have you? That's the point. What are you going down in, dickheads? Going down there! That's a key train! They're threatening every fucker! Everyone's sick of you, man! Every man sounds like a little bitch, man! Treat you like a bitch, because he is. That behaviour? When do you think that behaviour came? Eh? The problem is that your marriage is because of you. Couldn't fuck you. Couldn't fuck you as a baby, man. Do you understand that? I couldn't fuck you as a baby.
Welcome to Echoes of Crime. Today we're plunging into a case that truly shatters preconceptions, revealing a hidden world of domestic abuse meticulously concealed behind a facade of normalcy and success. This deep dive will unravel 2 decades of psychological torment and physical violence, brought to light through an extraordinary collection of evidence and the unwavering courage of a victim. Our mission is to explore the intricate timeline of control, the chilling details of the abuse, and the unexpected moments that ultimately led to justice, all centered around a family in what appeared, from the outside, to be an idyllic home. So let's set the scene for you. Imagine a warm, unsuspecting evening. Police respond to a domestic incident, a call reporting a serious situation. They pull up, lights flashing, sirens silence, to a truly impressive property. We're talking about a large, detached house nestled deep within a leafy, affluent suburb. A gleaming Jaguar sits on the drive, manicured hedges line the pathway, and everything about the exterior screams established, prosperous, perfectly normal. The officers themselves, as they approach the front door, confess their initial reaction, thinking, I think we've got to the wrong house here. These videos couldn't have come from a house like this. That profound dissonance, that immediate challenge to what we think domestic abuse looks like, is the first thing that really grabs you about this case.
It really is. And what's truly illuminating here is how deeply ingrained our societal stereotypes about domestic abuse can be, and how quickly this initial scene, dismantles them. Many people, when they envision a domestic incident, might picture a setting that aligns with certain socioeconomic disadvantages or, overt signs of distress. But this case, starting with that absolutely beautiful home and the trappings of wealth, immediately forces us to confront a far more uncomfortable truth. Abuse knows no socioeconomic boundaries. In fact, affluence can uniquely enable or mask abuse. Perpetrators with financial resources often wield greater control through economic means. And victims in such settings may face heightened social pressure to maintain a perfect facade, fearing loss of status or severe financial repercussions if they expose the abuse. This initial impression isn't just a detail. It's a powerful statement about the deceptive nature of coercive control, reminding us that the deepest, most private struggles can be masked by the most public displays of success. It's a stark reminder that the monster isn't always obvious. It can indeed reside comfortably within a leafy suburb, despite a 6-figure salary and a luxury car.
It's a powerful illustration, isn't it? A testament to how appearances can be so utterly deceiving. Now, it was Richard, the victim in this harrowing story, who eventually answered the door to the police. He presented a figure that sharply contrasted with the lavish surroundings. Sunken eyes, a simple white shirt, his posture noticeably hunched over. And the police officers observed something incredibly poignant, a small but profound act the very moment they arrived. He let out what they described as a massive sigh, as if the world had just been lifted off his shoulders. When they cautiously asked him about injuries, his initial response was chillingly cryptic. Not recently.
Yeah, that sigh, as you describe it, isn't just a simple breath of relief. It's an involuntary, deeply visceral release that speaks volumes about profound long-term suffering. Imagine holding your breath, figuratively, for years, even decades, trapped in a constant state of fear and emotional compression. That sigh signifies the overwhelming, almost unbearable relief that external intervention has finally broken through the isolating cycle of abuse. It's the sound of hope finally arriving. His response, not recently, to questions about injuries isn't a denial in the traditional sense. Instead, it's a chilling testament to the chronic nature of the abuse. It implies that while he might not have current visible injuries from that very moment, injuries, physical or emotional, were a constant recent presence in his life. It speaks volumes about his psychological state, a deeply ingrained acceptance of his horrific reality, where he had learned to differentiate between current immediate harm and the pervasive, continuous trauma he experienced.
And while Richard was experiencing this profound, quiet relief, what about Sheree, Richard's wife and the perpetrator of this abuse? When she was arrested for common assault, the officers noted she was quite drunk, found inside on the right-hand side of the house. But what was truly unsettling was her demeanor upon arrest. There was no shock from her, no verbal reply to the charges. But it gets even more perplexing, almost bizarre, when we follow her to the custody suite. She was observed laughing and joking, described as almost flirtatious with the custody sergeant, making casual requests like asking for a cell with a window, or even for the door to be left open. She even went so far as to invite the officer to come in with her.
This specific set of behaviors from Sheree is, unfortunately, a textbook example of how perpetrators of coercive control can react when finally confronted by authority. Her lack of shock or a direct reply upon arrest could stem from several psychological underpinnings. It might be denial, a complete disassociation from the reality and gravity of her actions. Alternatively, it could be a highly practiced performance, a mask she's honed over years, signifying a deep-seated disconnect from any sense of remorse or empathy. The laughing and joking, the flirtation at the custody suite, isn't a sign of innocence. It's a deeply manipulative attempt to control the situation and the perceptions of those around her. It suggests a personality accustomed to exerting dominance and deflecting blame, even in the face of overwhelming evidence. This behavior points to a profound egocentricity, where she prioritizes maintaining a favorable image and manipulating her environment, rather than processing the immense harm she's inflicted. She was, as the investigating officer noted, already telling her story, a carefully constructed narrative designed to present herself as the wronged party, even attempting to claim Richard had wanted to divorce her multiple times.
And in the midst of this chaotic scene, there were children present. Richard's eldest daughter, just a child, was actually standing halfway down the stairs, quietly witnessing the police presence in her home. Richard's immediate instinct, even amidst his own distress and the overwhelming relief he felt, was to shield her. He took her into a spare room, struggling to find the words to explain where her mother was going. All he could manage was the simple, heartbreaking phrase, "She's just going with the police for now."
And for law enforcement, the immediate and paramount priority in any domestic incident is always the welfare of any children involved. The silent trauma inflicted on children in such environments is immense and often underestimated, even if they don't appear outwardly distressed in every moment. They absorb the tension, the fear, and the patterns of interaction, which can have profound and lasting impacts on their development and future relationships. Richard's instinct to shield his daughter, despite his own suffering and emotional upheaval, highlights the impossible position. Victims are often placed in torn between protecting their children and navigating their own abuse. It also tragically reflects the pervasive fear he lived under. Richard later expressed concern that the police might view him as equally culpable for the chaotic home environment, and that, as a result, the children might be taken away from him. This twisted fear, born from his long-term conditioning, further exemplifies the insidious nature of coercive control. He wasn't just worried about himself. He was worried about losing the very reason he endured the abuse.
It's natural to wonder, listening to this, how a story like this could possibly begin, let alone escalate over 2 decades. Richard's account, pieced together from his testimony, paints a picture of a relationship that started with genuine promise, a seemingly ideal connection. He initially perceived Sheree as a really nice, kind, caring person, even describing her as almost a perfect girlfriend in those early days. But even then, there was a subtle undercurrent, an early acknowledgement of what he termed her dark side, a small 5–10% where this darkness came over and she'd lash out and she'd be angry. He recalled Sheree sharing stories of an unstable sort of upbringing, and Richard, with his deeply empathetic nature, felt a strong desire to make her life better, to be a positive influence in her life, hoping to compensate for what he perceived as her past unhappiness.
And this narrative, tragically, is a common blueprint for how abusive relationships often take root. Perpetrators frequently present an incredibly charming, loving, and even vulnerable facade in the initial stages. This love bombing draws the victim in, often promising a better, more stable life. Richard's empathetic nature, his desire to fix or save someone he cared about, created fertile ground for the abuse to begin. He was willing to overlook those early, nascent, dark sides in the hope of nurturing the good he saw in her. believing his positive influence could somehow heal her past wounds. This dynamic often prevents victims from recognizing early warning signs as they're invested in the initial promise and believe they can help change their partner. It's a mirroring of his own childhood coping. He had learned to suppress emotions from a young age, particularly after his mother died when he was 9, an experience he likened to physical pain where he fought back tears. This early conditioning to not show weakness made him, in a way, more vulnerable to accepting and enduring Sheree's horrible things.
And those early warning signs were certainly there, slowly eroding the foundation of their relationship. Richard vividly recalled what he considered the first truly significant drunken argument. During this incident, Sheree threw a glass lamp, shattering it, and then physically pushed him. The noise was so loud and disruptive that a neighbor upstairs actually banged on the floor, clearly having heard the commotion. Richard, ever the conciliator, wrote an apology note to the neighbor, a gesture of goodwill. But Sheree reacted with anger, rejecting the apology and immediately working to normalize the incident. She told him, "It's normal for people to have arguments," and dismissively added, "Who cares what anyone else thinks?" Richard, hoping for the best, tried to dismiss it as a one-off, still clinging to the powerful hope that marriage and eventually children would bring a lasting happiness, that he could indeed be that positive, stabilizing influence in her life.
These seemingly minor early incidents are absolutely crucial in understanding the insidious progression of coercive control. They establish a dangerous precedent, incrementally shifting the boundaries of what is considered acceptable behavior within the relationship. By immediately excusing or normalizing her aggressive actions, Sheree subtly eroded Richard's perception of what was normal or tolerable. Her outright dismissal of the neighbor's concern, coupled with Richard's deeply held hope for future happiness through marriage and children, illustrates a classic dynamic. Victims are slowly conditioned to accept increasingly abusive behavior. They rationalize it, clinging to the memory of the initial perfect girlfriend persona, unaware they are being drawn into a cycle that will incrementally worsen. This normalization is a powerful psychological tool for an abuser, making the victim doubt their own judgment and gradually internalize the abuser's warped reality. It's a foundational step in the systematic dismantling of a person's autonomy and self-worth.
As the relationship progressed, the pressure to start a family introduced a new, deeply disturbing dimension of abuse and control. Sheree decided, quite unilaterally, that it was time now that we should try for children. She then began to make demands, for example, insisting on sex twice on that day to double our chances, transforming what should be an act of love and intimacy into something entirely on demand. When Richard, understandably, couldn't always comply with these demands, the verbal abuse began. "You're not a man," she'd taunt him. "You should be able to just do this one thing." In one particularly venomous outburst, she screamed, "I'm getting bastard. You know what I do today? I've never have married you." Richard tragically described how sex, something that should bring joy and connection, became something he actively dreaded rather than an act of love or pleasure. The eventual recommendation for IVF actually came as an immense relief to him because it meant they wouldn't need to be having, intercourse all these times.
This is a profound and deeply disturbing example of how even the most intimate aspects of a relationship can be weaponized within a pattern of coercive control. By turning sex into a non-negotiable demand, a performance, and then using Richard's perceived inability to comply as a launchpad for verbal abuse, Sheree systematically stripped it of any mutual pleasure, love, or connection. This psychological toll is devastating, leading to a profound sense of dehumanization. The victim feels their body, their desires, and their very self are no longer their own, but rather tools to be controlled and exploited by the abuser. Richard's profound dread highlights the immense psychological burden this placed upon him. The relief he felt at the prospect of IVF speaks volumes about the level of distress he was experiencing. It demonstrates how deeply the abuse had infiltrated and corrupted every corner of their shared intimate life, transforming what should be a source of connection into a source of dread and degradation.
And tragically, even the arrival of their children, a moment often associated with profound joy and bonding, didn't bring lasting peace to Richard's life. After a brief, almost illusory honeymoon period post-childbirth, the insidious insults and insinuations slowly, incrementally crept back into their daily interactions, eventually intensifying. "You've got a complete fucking attitude, bitchy cunt of a wife from now on," she'd tell him. "You've had it fucking very easy. You've had it very, very nice." The verbal abuse was relentless, designed to chip away at his self-worth. But it wasn't just words. Sheree engaged in deeply demoralizing physical acts, such as cracking eggs on Richard's head and pushing them into his face, sometimes with such force and anger that the eggshell would cut into my skin. He described feeling utterly hopeless after these incidents, recalling her cruel shouts, "Keep cleaning, you cunt, dirty bitch!" And in one particularly horrifying revelation, Richard recounted that Sheree had, on one occasion, defecated on his head, demanding he pick my shit up.
This specific type of emotional and psychological abuse, particularly when it escalates to such dehumanizing acts, can often be far more damaging and leave deeper, longer-lasting scars than purely physical violence. It creates profound feelings of worthlessness and systematically erodes a victim's self-identity, breaking them down from the inside out. When children are present, this form of abuse becomes even more insidious, as it normalizes such cruel and demeaning behavior within the family unit, implicitly teaching children that this is how relationships function and how one person can treat another. The demoralizing things, like the egg incident, the truly shocking act of defecating on his head, are designed not just to hurt physically, but to strip the victim of every shred of dignity, self-respect, and humanity, cementing their perceived powerlessness and making escape seem utterly impossible. The verbal attacks targeting his mother and sister. "I hope your sister dies from breast cancer. I hope a fat gun dies. Quick, I hope she's dead," further highlight how Sheree would weaponize Richard's deepest vulnerabilities and his love for others. Richard's constant effort to present a facade of normalcy, always putting on a brave front that he was fine while inside I was really upset, underscores the immense psychological burden he carried. Her mocking him as a robot because he wouldn't retaliate demonstrates her expectation of a reaction, and his coping mechanism of suppressing emotion, a strategy he'd learned from childhood, was now being twisted against him.
The abuse, both emotional and psychological, relentlessly escalated to undeniable physical violence. Richard vividly remembered one particularly brutal incident when Sheree, after consuming a couple of bottles of wine, picked up a wine bottle and with malicious intent struck him on the ear. He quoted her exact words, laced with venom. "She really fucking move out of my face then. Fucking get out of it, you fucking ugly bastards." In a moment of clarity and instinctual self-preservation, Richard immediately took pictures of his injuries, recognizing with a chilling certainty that it had gone further than it normally would. What followed was even more brutal, a sickening continuation of the violence. The very next day, Sheree returned to his already injured, swollen ear, punching and kicking it repeatedly. He recounted desperately begging her to stop, describing it as the most painful thing I've ever experienced. This wasn't an isolated incident. Richard later recounted how, between the 1st and 10th of April, Sheree repeatedly beat him with a wine bottle for 10 consecutive days, sometimes even in front of their children, causing a visible disfigurement of his ear. He stated with harrowing clarity, "I thought I was going to die."
This progressive nature of domestic violence, where acts of aggression gradually increase in frequency and severity, is a critical and terrifying pattern that we often observe. What might begin with verbal abuse or smaller physical acts incrementally escalates, and the victim's tolerance for abuse can tragically increase over time due to complex psychological factors like trauma bonding, a distorted sense of loyalty, or a desperate hope for change. The specific detail of Sheree repeatedly attacking an already injured, vulnerable area like Richard's ear, particularly the next day, demonstrates an extreme level of cruelty and a clear intent to inflict maximum pain and suffering. The revelation of a 10-day period of continuous beating with a wine bottle, resulting in disfigurement and leading Richard to believe he would die, marks a horrific peak in the physical violence. This isn't just abuse, it's sustained torture. It highlights the severe and immediate danger Richard was living in, pushing him beyond his perceived limits and further cementing his sense of hopelessness.
It was after this terrifying escalation of physical violence, this prolonged period of torture, that Sheree resorted to even more terrifying and manipulative tactics. She began to threaten Richard with legal repercussions, but in a twisted, insidious way. She threatened to smash her own face into a mirror and then deliberately cut herself, solely to blame Richard for the injuries. Her plan was to claim he had done it, send pictures of her fabricated injuries to friends or neighbors, and use that false evidence to secure a restraining order, preventing him from seeing their baby. She even took her manipulative acts public, shouting out the window for neighbors to hear, "Richard, Richard, stop it, you're hurting me, stop hitting me," adding, "Hitting me all the time, hitting me because you're drunk." Her chilling declaration to him, delivered with absolute certainty, was, "I'm much cleverer than you, you'll never win." But it was this specific threat, this calculated manipulation involving his children, that proved to be Richard's turning point. He recalled, "Something just changed in me then. I thought, well, there's no way I'm gonna I'm going to let that happen so that, well, I'll get my own evidence then.
This is a classic and profoundly disturbing example of how abusers weaponize not just physical violence, but also children and the legal system to maintain absolute control. Sheree's threats to self-harm and fabricate evidence, coupled with her public performance of victimhood, are not impulsive acts. They are calculated, strategic moves designed to isolate Richard, discredit him, and prevent him from ever seeking help. The declaration, "I'm much cleverer than you, you'll never win," perfectly encapsulates the abuser's psychological need for absolute dominance and superiority within the relationship. This particular form of manipulation, threatening to turn his love and fear for his children against him, inadvertently sparked Richard's desperate but ultimately courageous decision. Realizing he was facing a foe who would stop at nothing, even fabricating evidence, he understood he needed concrete proof to protect his children and himself. This moment marked a pivotal shift, a quiet rebellion, in his long, arduous journey towards seeking justice. It was a conscious choice born from sheer self-preservation and a parent's protective instinct. Tag 3. Richard's inner battle and search for solace.
Richard's ability to endure such prolonged and horrific abuse was, in some ways, tragically shaped by a deeply ingrained coping mechanism developed during his childhood. His mother died when he was just 9 years old, an experience he described as almost like a physical pain. He remembered fighting back tears, consciously not wanting to share weakness, perhaps influenced by the societal expectations placed on young boys. He draws a direct, heartbreaking connection between this early trauma and his adult response to Sheree's abuse, stating, "When Sheree would say all these horrible things to me, I think I did the same thing. I could suppress it because I'd done it before when I felt upset about my mom dying."
This connection between early trauma and later coping strategies is incredibly insightful and crucial to understanding Richard's resilience and, paradoxically, his vulnerability. Early experiences of loss, especially when accompanied by societal pressure to suppress emotions, can profoundly shape an individual's psychological makeup. Richard's internalized pressure not to show weakness created a perfect storm for Sheree's abuse to take root and flourish. His learned ability to suppress his emotions, a survival mechanism from childhood, inadvertently became the very tool that allowed him to endure the insidious emotional and physical abuse for so long. It made it harder for him to recognize the true severity of his situation, to react outwardly, or to seek help, as his internal wiring had trained him to internalize pain rather than express it. This is a common, though tragic, pattern for survivors of early childhood trauma, making them predisposed to unhealthy relationship dynamics later in life.
Sheree, with her manipulative prowess, was acutely aware of this coping mechanism, and she weaponized it against him. She mockingly called Richard a robot, precisely because he wouldn't get angry, I wouldn't retaliate, I wouldn't do anything, I would just sit there. This was not praise. It was a deliberate attempt to provoke him, to break his composure, to assert her absolute control by mocking his very method of survival. Her verbal attacks were truly horrific, at times specifically targeting his loved ones, cutting him to his core with statements like, "I hope your sister dies from breast cancer," or "I hope if Fat Gun dies quick, I hope she's dead." Richard described burying his immense feelings of sadness and fear, always putting on a brave front that he was fine, while inside I was really upset. As we mentioned, the ultimate act of dehumanization came when she defecated on his head, ordering him to pick my shit up.
This is the insidious, deeply damaging nature of emotional abuse laid bare. Sheree's taunt of calling him a robot was a calculated psychological maneuver. She wanted a reaction, an explosion that she could then use to blame him. When he didn't give her one, she escalated the abuse to break his spirit. The attacks on his loved ones, wishing illness or death upon his sister or mother, demonstrate an extreme level of psychological cruelty. These are designed to inflict maximum pain by striking at his deepest vulnerabilities and attachments, leaving him no sanctuary even in his thoughts. This systematic dehumanization, culminating in the shocking act of defecating on his head and forcing him to clean it, aims to utterly strip the victim of dignity, self-respect, and their very humanity. It systematically grinds them down, forcing them to internalize immense pain and worthlessness, further isolating them and eroding their self-identity. Richard's constant effort to present a facade of normalcy, while inside I was really upset, highlights the immense psychological burden he carried. He was living a dual existence, one where he appeared unaffected to the outside world, and another where he was slowly dying inside. He even developed survival tactics for when she'd kick him out. Finding the hot spot by the boiler on the outside of the house was the warmest place to get some release from the bitter cold. A chilling adaptation to constant fear and homelessness in his own backyard.
A pivotal, almost life-saving moment came during a neighborhood barbecue. Richard arrived with the children, explaining that Sheree would join them later. When she eventually appeared, peering over the fence, she looked, as Richard described it, a little disheveled and immediately issued a harsh demand. "Get those children to bed now." Richard, conditioned to comply, apologized and promptly left with the children. However, he returned later, and that's when he finally, cautiously, opened up to his neighbor, Emma. Emma, understanding his struggle, didn't just listen. She held his hand and, crucially, told him directly, unequivocally, "You don't have to put up with this, and she's ruining your life, Richard." Richard's immediate feeling of strength and confidence was palpable, almost overwhelming, he recounted. "I could still hear, Emma's words in my mind saying, 'You've got this, Richard, you've got this.'" He felt a profound sense of relief just knowing someone else knew what she could be like.
This act of external validation and support is absolutely critical for victims of abuse, and often marks the turning point in their journey toward freedom. Abusers thrive on isolation, creating a reality where the victim believes their experiences are unique, their perceptions flawed, and that no one would ever believe them. Emma's simple yet profound act, holding his hand, offering direct, unambiguous affirmation, was a lifeline for Richard. It broke through years of conditioning, gaslighting, and self-doubt. It provided Richard with the courage to truly recognize the severity of his situation and empowered him to begin to act. The feeling of strength and confidence, Richard describes, underscores the transformative power of breaking the silence and receiving genuine empathy and objective reality from an outside source. It gave him a sense of control and affirmation he hadn't felt in years, allowing him to see his predicament not as a personal failure, but as an injustice he could fight.
Another crucial intervention, a moment of objective clarity, came from an outside perspective, this time from a longtime friend. Sheree, ever the manipulator, made a preemptive strike, calling Richard's old friend Tony and attempting to poison his perception by blaming Richard, claiming he was drunk and argumentative. However, Richard, after that turning point, decided to take a huge risk. He sent the secretly recorded videos of the abuse to Tony, his voice filled with desperation as he asked, "Can you tell me if I'm overreacting or if I'm doing the right thing?" He openly admitted, "I really didn't trust my own decision-making anymore." Tony's response was decisive and immediate. "You're definitely not overreacting," he affirmed and added, "I'm worried about you." Crucially, Tony then made the incredibly difficult but ultimately necessary decision to report the abuse to the police without Richard's explicit consent, stating firmly, "I've got to do what I think is the right thing to do."
This interaction with Tony highlights the profound impact of having an objective third party confirm the reality of the abuse, especially when a victim's judgment has been severely undermined by years of gaslighting and psychological manipulation. Richard's question, "Can you tell me if I'm overreacting?" perfectly illustrates the profound self-doubt and emotional distortion instilled by an abuser. Tony's decision to report, even without explicit consent, navigates a complex ethical dilemma. While respecting autonomy is paramount, in situations of severe, ongoing abuse where the victim's safety is at grave risk, reporting without consent can be absolutely vital for their well-being and to break the cycle of violence. Tony recognized that Richard was too deeply ensnared to act unilaterally, and that the gravity of the situation warranted intervention, regardless of Richard's immediate fear. This courageous act initiated the formal investigation, provided the crucial external impetus that Richard himself had struggled for years to summon. It moved the situation from a private hell to a public concern, demanding accountability.
The moment the police officers sat down to review Richard's secretly recorded videos of the abuse, the impact was undeniable and profound. These weren't just pieces of evidence. They were raw, unfiltered glimpses into Richard's living nightmare. Officers described them as unique and incredibly emotive, confessing that they had to pause several times and literally collect my emotions. One officer stated with a visible tremor in his voice, "There's something about those videos that I just really found emotive, really, and I struggled." These weren't clinical observations. They were reactions to witnessing profound human suffering captured in its brutal reality.
It is incredibly rare for law enforcement to encounter such irrefutable, visual, and raw evidence in domestic violence cases. Often these cases hinge heavily on victim testimony, which can be challenging to obtain and sustain due to the immense trauma, fear of retaliation, or a deep-seated desire to protect the abuser, a hallmark of trauma bonding. The undeniable power of these video recordings bypassed these common obstacles. They provided objective, visceral proof that even seasoned officers, hardened by years of dealing with crime, found deeply disturbing and emotionally overwhelming. It allowed them to understand the true depth of the abuse in a way words alone or even photographs could never convey. This immediate emotional reaction from the police underscores just how horrific the captured events truly were, shattering any remaining facade of normalcy that Sheree had meticulously built. For the investigation, this kind of evidence is gold, making the case against Sheree exceptionally strong and almost irrefutable.
Following Sheree's initial arrest for common assault, a moment of profound intervention, Richard felt a surge of freedom, a sense of liberation he hadn't experienced in years. With the immediate pressure eased, he began to fully disclose the 20 years of abuse he had endured, meticulously detailing a lifetime of torment. Yet even after this incredible breakthrough, he admitted to feeling immense guilt about having the very evidence that could save him. He confessed to contemplating deleting the videos during what he called honeymoon periods, those deceptive interludes when Sheree would act kindly, showering him with affection, making him believe she had genuinely changed. He reflected with a shudder, "It's horrifying if I think that if I had gone ahead and deleted that evidence now, in hindsight."
This complex, often contradictory emotional response is a definitive hallmark of victims in long-term abusive relationships, particularly those characterized by coercive control and trauma bonding. The victim often still cares for or even loves their abuser, especially during those cyclical honeymoon periods where the abuser might show genuine remorse or intense affection. These periods of calm, often interspersed with declarations of love, are incredibly confusing and powerfully reinforce the victim's hope that the abuser will change. This dynamic leads to profound guilt over incriminating them, a twisted sense of loyalty formed through years of psychological manipulation. Richard's admission of almost deleting the evidence perfectly illustrates this internal conflict. His profound regret over potentially deleting it, now with hindsight, underscores the critical role it ultimately played in validating his experience, ensuring his safety, and securing a pathway to justice, even though at the time his emotional state and the deep conditioning of the abuse made him question his own actions and the necessity of the proof.
What's truly heartbreaking, truly chilling, are the elaborate defense mechanisms Richard developed over 2 decades just to cope with the relentless violence and humiliation. He revealed a confession that speaks volumes about his daily reality. Knowing when abuse was coming, when Sheree was about to lash out, he would intentionally change into a specific type of garment, a papa shirt, a shirt with snap fasteners instead of buttons. He explained the rationale with a chilling clarity. "I don't know if she's violent towards me, then it's unlikely to be a papa, just pull the papa shirt off." This wasn't vanity. It was a desperate, almost instinctive attempt to minimize the damage, to protect his meager belongings from being torn in her rages. He also harbored deep, pervasive concerns for his children, fearing that if he reported the abuse, he might be seen as equally culpable for the chaotic home environment and, as a result, lose custody of them. He would curl into a fetal position to protect his face during beatings, not just for his own safety, but so he could still be physically able to take the girls to school and nursery the next day. As we previously mentioned, he even knew exactly where to go outside the house for warmth, a specific hot spot by the boiler, when Sheree, in her rage, kicked him out of their supposedly beautiful home.
This is a devastating and profoundly insightful look into the psychological impact of living in constant, pervasive fear. It forces a victim to adapt their behavior in truly shocking, almost unimaginable ways, constantly anticipating abuse and developing elaborate, however desperate, strategies just to survive and maintain some semblance of functionality. Richard's meticulous planning, even down to the type of shirt he wore, highlights the systematic nature of the control and the extent to which his life was dictated by Sheree's volatility. His overriding concern about being perceived as just as bad as Sheree tragically illuminates the twisted sense of responsibility and self-blame that can develop after long-term abuse. He had been so conditioned to internalize blame that he feared losing his children, the very reason he endured the abuse, due to his own victimhood. The image of him in a fetal position, protecting his face so he could still fulfill his parental duties, and his knowledge of the boiler hotspot are harrowing testaments to his daily fight for survival, a tragically distorted parental love, and the profound dehumanization he experienced. These aren't just defense mechanisms. They are profound adaptations to a sustained terror that most of us can only imagine.
Now, let's turn to Sheree's side of the story, or rather, her crafted narrative. On June 17, 2021, she underwent an interview at Clough Road Police Station. She initially presented with an almost uncanny composure and what the officers describe as dignity, but her narrative when it began was a masterclass in deflection, a calculated performance. Her immediate response was to portray Richard, her victim, as the abuser. "He's a secret drinker. I've begged him not to do that," she claimed, and sensationally added, "He's fell asleep with my baby on the chair." She continued, presenting herself as the long-suffering victim. He's dragged me around the bedroom by my hair, she falsely alleged, and I've tried to divorce him 10 times or 11 times last year. She flatly denied any responsibility for coercive control, brazenly asserting, I would think he's responsible for controlling me.
Sheree's behavior during this interrogation is a textbook exhibition of common abuser tactics. Gaslighting, projection, and victim blaming, all executed with chilling precision. She immediately attempted to rewrite history, meticulously crafting a false narrative that positioned herself as the long-suffering party and Richard as the volatile, negligent perpetrator. Skilled investigators are acutely aware of these deflections and are trained to navigate them, understanding that perpetrators of coercive control rarely admit culpability directly. Her ability to maintain composure and dignity while spitting such an elaborate and false narrative underscores the deeply manipulative nature of coercive control. It's a mechanism where the perpetrator meticulously crafts an alternate reality, a convenient fiction, not only to evade accountability, but to maintain their perceived power. As the police noted, she had her story in place, and she was willing to tell it, but it wasn't the actual story that happened. This calculated approach, even under interrogation, speaks volumes about her entrenched personality.
Despite Sheree's insistent denials, Richard had meticulously compiled what the police called an undeniable catalog of injuries. The officers had photos showing bruising, then subsequent photos showing yellowing bruises, and then, disturbingly, fresh purple bruises layered directly on top of the older ones. This wasn't just proof of injury, it depicted the depth of the abuse, literally layered on his physical skin over time. When confronted with this overwhelming photographic evidence, Sheree maintained an utterly emotionless look. She sorted through the photos, admitting to some injuries, flatly denying others, and even twisting the narrative of some bite marks, claiming they were sexual in nature. She asserted that cuts on his wrists were due to her restraining him because he was lashing out. The officer noted with a sense of disbelief she was just emotionless, really, just didn't care. She vehemently denied hitting him with a wine bottle, instead fabricating a story that they were fighting, grappling over a bottle of wine. He fell and hit his ear on here, or his head. She even admitted to coercing Richard to use her brother's details at the hospital to hide an injury, threatening him with not being allowed back in the house if he didn't comply.
The catalog of injuries served as utterly objective and irrefutable evidence that stood in stark contrast to Sheree's carefully constructed denials. The layering of bruises over time painted a clear and sickening picture of sustained, escalating violence, making it impossible to dismiss as isolated incidents or accidental falls. Sheree's chillingly emotionless look and her fabricated explanations attempting to reframe consensual sexual acts, claiming self-defense or concocting stories of accidental falls, demonstrate a profound lack of empathy, a complete absence of remorse, and a desperate, calculated attempt to undermine the overwhelming evidence. This behavior is disturbingly consistent with perpetrators who operate with a profound disconnect from the reality of their victims' suffering. Her ability to sell ice to Eskimos, as the investigating officer visibly put it, perfectly highlights her manipulative prowess, even when faced with incontrovertible proof. It's a testament to the cognitive dissonance common to abusers, where their internal narrative is so powerful it overrides external reality.
The investigation took an even more dramatic and truly shocking turn when the police presented Sheree with video exhibit RH-28. This video graphically depicted her with a large knife held directly to Richard's throat. Initially, the video was played without audio, a technical accident that proved remarkably revealing. Sheree immediately seized on the silence, quickly spinning a meticulously prepared narrative. She claimed Richard had threatened to kill her, and she was merely offering him the knife, wanting to die herself in a moment of desperation. It was, as the officer observed, almost as if she kind of planned ahead or knew Zaka was going to be referring to. But then, when the crucial audio was played, Sheree's carefully constructed facade shattered. Her aggressive, controlling language was unmistakable, chilling, and utterly damning. "Warned ya? Warned, yeah," she screamed. "Then I didn't fucking like you, Ryan." And most chillingly, an explicit command laden with menace, "Don't you dare fucking laugh at me again." Still, even in the face of this irrefutable audio-visual evidence, Sheree persisted in her deflections, stubbornly stating, "He's been making threats and I've reacted."
This incident with the knife, particularly the sequence of events during its presentation, is incredibly revealing about the depth of Sheree's manipulation and control. Her immediate prepared narrative, delivered even before the audio was played, indicates a high degree of premeditation and a deeply manipulative mindset. She aimed to portray herself as a desperate victim forced to defend herself or even as suicidal, a classic tactic to garner sympathy and deflect blame. However, The raw, unfiltered audio utterly shattered this carefully constructed facade. The aggressive, controlling, and deeply threatening tone in her voice directly contradicted her claims of victimhood and desperation, exposing the true nature of her aggression and intent. The fact that she continued to deflect, even when confronted with irrefutable audio-visual evidence of her aggression, underscores the deep-seated denial, inability to take responsibility, and psychological detachment that defines many perpetrators of coercive control. It's a powerful demonstration of how an abuser will cling to their fabricated reality, even when it directly contradicts objective truth. #5. Aftermath and lingering echoes.
Following her intensive interrogation, Sheree was police bailed to a friend's house in Leeds, a significant way from her family home. This geographical separation, enforced by law, was more than just a logistical arrangement. For Richard, it brought an overwhelming, almost intoxicating feeling of relief. I'm free from everything," he recalled, the words echoing with a profound sense of liberation. He felt a massive weight off my shoulders to know that she couldn't come back and she couldn't even contact me. For the first time in 2 decades, he felt a genuine, tangible sense of protection from her relentless abuse.
This physical separation, even if temporary due to bail conditions, is an absolutely critical first step for a victim's immediate safety and their long-term psychological recovery. It provides a much-needed respite from the constant fear, the pervasive surveillance, and the relentless coercive control. This crucial distance allows them to begin the arduous process of processing the trauma without the immediate threat of further harm. Richard's immediate and overwhelming feeling of freedom and relief, stemming even from just the inability to receive abusive messages or calls, highlights how deeply entwined his very existence was with her control. This initial taste of independence, however temporary, can be truly transformative, beginning the arduous process of emotional healing and breaking the deeply ingrained cycle of dependency and trauma bonding. It's the first breath of clean air after suffocating for years.
Yet even in this critical moment of separation, when her life was irrevocably altered, Sheree's priorities were shockingly, chillingly clear. When she was released on bail, her only concern, her first question was, "I hope he's packed my hair straighteners." The investigating officer, struck by this profound disconnect, felt compelled to deliver what he called a reality bump, gently telling her directly, "Your children are okay, by the way," attempting to steer her attention to their welfare. Sheree, throughout the entire process, never once asked about her children, and the following day, Richard himself, still caught in the powerful, deeply ingrained patterns of codependency and trauma bonding, expressed concern for Sheree. "I bet she was really emotional. I'm really worried for her." The officer, witnessing this continuing loyalty, had to gently, yet firmly, tell Richard, "She's not bothered about the children or about you. She asked if you'd packed her hair straighteners." Richard then broke down in tears, a profound realization dawning on him, admitting, "I did pack her hair straighteners. I knew exactly what she wanted me to pack."
This anecdote perfectly, albeit chillingly, illustrates the profound disconnect from reality displayed by Sheree, and simultaneously, the deeply entrenched codependency and trauma bonding that had permeated Richard's psyche over 2 decades. Sheree's unwavering focus on her hair straighteners over the welfare of her children is a stark and deeply disturbing indicator of her narcissistic tendencies, and a profound, almost complete lack of maternal instinct or empathy. Her children were not a priority, or even a thought. Richard's continued concern for her, even after her arrest for severe abuse, and his tearful admission of instinctively packing her straighteners, revealed the powerful, almost unbreakable hold she still had over him. He was so conditioned to anticipate her needs, to maintain a semblance of their twisted dynamic, that he instinctively catered to her, despite being her victim. This scene powerfully encapsulates the depth of psychological manipulation and the insidious nature of trauma bonding that had taken place over 2 decades, where the victim continues to prioritize the abuser's needs even after liberation.
As the case moved towards court, Sheree continued her masterclass in deflection, maintaining her victim narrative. She even went so far as to attend victim classes, twisting events to fit her carefully constructed, self-serving story. But on the actual court day, the stark reality of Richard's experience and Sheree's isolation became painfully clear. The outpouring of support for Richard was overwhelming. Extra chairs had to be brought into the courtroom to accommodate everyone, and notably, devastatingly for Sheree, not one single person there for Sheree. It was only at the very last minute, just before proceedings were to begin, that Sheree finally pleaded guilty and acted the police officer described as the ultimate summary of her character, a final cynical calculation.
The overwhelming outpouring of community and legal support for Richard in court was instrumental in affirming his truth and providing the immense strength needed to see the arduous process through to its conclusion. This collective validation countered years of isolation and gaslighting. The stark absence of any support for Sheree in court, juxtaposed with her continued victim blaming, even while attending victim classes, powerfully reinforces her manipulative character and her profound isolation from objective reality. Her last-minute guilty plea, after prolonging the legal process and attempting to maintain her false narrative, can be interpreted not as genuine remorse, but as a final, strategic act of control or a calculated avoidance of facing the full public humiliation and potential harsher sentence of a trial. It speaks volumes about her continued self-preservation above all else, rather than any genuine acceptance of responsibility for the 2 decades of terror she inflicted. It's a sad final chapter to her manipulative game.
Today, Richard's reflection on Sheree is, perhaps surprisingly to some, strikingly free of anger or bitterness. I don't have any anger towards her. I don't really have any strong emotions towards her, he shared, speaking with a quiet resolve. His deepest hope is not for her punishment, but for the future well-being of their children. I hope the best for her future, I guess. I want the girls to know and think that their mom's having a nice, happy life. He believes, perhaps still clinging to some shred of their initial connection, that Sheree's initial feelings for him were genuine, but that the need for her to control me kind of grew, and I think I was just there for her to take things out on.
Richard's long-term psychological processing, moving beyond anger to a desire for peace, healing, and most importantly, his children's happiness, is a common and often profound trajectory for survivors of sustained trauma. It reflects a shift from being consumed by the abuse to prioritizing the future, especially when children are involved, as they become the primary focus. His attempt to rationalize Sheree's motivations that her need for control grew, and he was there for her to take things out on, highlights the ongoing struggle many victims face to comprehend such extreme and irrational abuse. It's a way for victims to construct a narrative, however imperfect, that allows them to make sense of the incomprehensible and move forward without being entirely consumed by hatred or bitterness. This journey from silent suffering, through courageous disclosure fueled by vital evidence and external support, to finding a measure of peace, is a powerful testament to human resilience and the profound capacity for emotional recovery.
This deep dive into Richard and Sheree's story reveals a harrowing truth. Domestic abuse, particularly coercive control, often operates in the deepest shadows, meticulously masked by outward appearances and fueled by incredibly complex psychological dynamics. Richard's journey from silent suffering to courageous disclosure, painstakingly aided by vital video evidence and the unwavering support of others, stands as a testament to profound human resilience. It also painfully illustrates the profound, pervasive, and lasting impact of coercive control, not just on the immediate victim, but on the entire family unit. What lingers most powerfully for me is the pervasive question. Even when the physical abuse finally stops and the legal system brings some semblance of justice, how long do the invisible echoes of crime truly resonate in a family's life, and what responsibility do we all have as individuals and as a society to listen for those whispers and act?